I wanted to try something new for my channel, and instead of doing a pretty raw and unedited read-through that comes off as a review, I would instead read through a product ahead of time, write out a script for this review, and try to keep it streamlined and clear. Let me know if you have a strong preference. This is a review of the new Stargate SG-1 role-playing game core rulebook, released last year after a successful crowdfunding campaign by Wyvern Gaming. It's officially licensed Stargate content from MGM, replacing a system that has been out of print for at least a decade now. This new system from Wyvern Gaming is interesting because it uses the D&D 5e rule set, made available in its SRD, and applied to a very different setting and game genre than the high fantasy that you're used to seeing with this RPG system. So, the main question is, does the system and setting work together and make sense? Or does it ever feel like the setting is fighting the system in a way that would detract from the enjoyment of the game? I was also interested to see if Wyvern adds anything new to the 5th edition system to make the game feel more Stargate-y, or if they simply made some sci-fi-esque classes, backgrounds, and feats and called it a day. So, let's talk about it. I am a huge Stargate fan. There are 2 shows I remember watching live on TV with my dad in my early formative childhood years: Star Trek Voyager and Stargate SG-1. I was literally raised with Star Trek and Stargate as my main pieces of fiction I engaged with at an early age. In more recent years, I actually attempted to build and run my own Stargate RPG game using the Genesis system, which I think could have worked had I spent more time on it. I backed Wyvern's Kickstarter for multiple reasons. 1, I'll support anything officially Stargate because I desperately want MGM to resurrect this franchise. 2, I'm always morbidly fascinated by any studio wanting to create a 5e game that does anything besides high fantasy, because honestly, I'm of the opinion that it can't and probably shouldn't be done. There are other fantastic RPG systems that aren't hamstrung by being specifically crafted to do high fantasy, like Dungeons & Dragons. And often, folks building other types of games on 5e are doing so for financial reasons, not because it's the best system for their game. So, does the Stargate SG-1 RPG prove me wrong? In Stargate SG-1, you assume the role of a Stargate team member, working with a secret off-world Stargate program designated Phoenix Base. As a member of Phoenix Base, you and your teammates go on missions to explore new worlds and cultures, obtain new technology, and fight to preserve freedom across the Milky Way galaxy. For you fans of the TV show, the events of the book happen during/after Season 6 of the main SG-1 TV show, specifically after Episode 9, Allegiance. That's the season where both the System Lord Anubis are at his peak powers, the replicators have become a grave threat to Earth, and humanity has built their first true battleship capable of faster-than-light travel, the Prometheus. Pretty much peak SG-1. Plenty of threats to deal with, so a great time in-universe. All of that is in page 6 of the introduction. And just 2 pages later, in a sidebar specifically designed for curious and skeptical GMs like me, Wyvern answers our most main question by specifically calling out changes that they've made to the 5th edition rule set. First, leveling all the way to 20 is out the window. Instead, PCs choose their class at level 1, progress to level 5, and then become specialists, purchasing whatever feat they would like to customize their character. The game uses attention die, ranging from 1d4 for comedic episodes to 1d12 for all is lost. These help set the tone of the game session, or, in this game, an episode. Depending on the tension rating, most damage is assumed to be non-lethal by default. A new wagering resource called Determination Points are used during different types of encounters. Some abilities and feats allow for Determination Points to be used in other and unique ways. Initiative has been expanded to allow PC's Wisdom to be used instead of just their Dexterity. A new stat called Moxie is tied to a PC's Intelligence or Charisma and used as a replacement for Initiative in non-action encounters. Mission points replace traditional XP. It isn't awarded just for combat, but instead by successfully completing missions. Lots and on the surface, good changes to core 5th edition, removing things that would inherently make it difficult to run an SG-1 type game. The biggest in my mind being decoupling character advancement from combat rewards, instead simply rewarding PCs for completing missions. Now, do a lot of D&D tables already do that? Yes. And do all official published adventure modules instruct DMs to award XP for non-combat solutions to combat encounters? Yes, they do. But still, it's good that Wyvern calls us out from the get-go. Let's talk about the tension die, because outside of character creation, it's probably the coolest new addition to the system. At the beginning of each game session, called an episode in the Stargate SG-1 RPG, the GM assigns the episode a tension rating. That rating ranges from 1d4 to 1d12, with higher die types representing more dangerous and tense episodes or scenes. Mechanics in-game will use the tension die added to other rolls, notated as a +D in the rulebook. As an example, an attack can deal 1d8 plus TD damage, increasing the damage in higher tension scenes. This is a really cool mechanic, I think, for a variety of reasons. It's a way for the GM to signal to the players ahead of time what the tone of the mission may be, meaning that even before the day of the session is played, the GM can let their group know that it's a 1d10 tension episode, so that the players are mentally prepared to come in and have a more serious play session. On the flip side, the players now have a language framework for communicating a desire to the GM. Say that the group has had a rough go of it for a few play sessions. The players could say, hey, would it be possible to have a 1d4 tension episode next time? We could use a sillier, lighter session after the past few weeks. Yes, all that could happen in a normal D&D 5e game with decent communication between all the players. But it's really cool to see it actually codified in the rulebook, and to see it impacting something essential as weapon damage. Alright, let's talk character creation, where a RPG lives or dies in my opinion. The Stargate SG-1 RPG uses the same 6 attributes as core 5th edition. The rulebook also has rolling 4d6 and dropping the lowest as its default random ability generation process, but also includes a point buy for tables that don't like rolling for stats. I would have loved to see some variation here, like dropping stat generation as a process altogether, and going for a system like Pathfinder 2e where your character choices dictate your ability scores, but I'm fine with default. The game also continues to use proficiency bonus unchanged from core 5th edition, something I would have really liked to see changed, as I don't think it's exceptionally useful. Something kind of interesting is that the game has chosen to use meters instead of the default imperial feet measurement, which isn't that impactful, but it is interesting to look at a PC with a default speed of 6 meters instead of the more used 5 feet that I'm used to. Like I said earlier, initiative uses your PC's dex or wisdom modifier, whichever is higher. Initiative is only used for establishing order in combat. For non-combat encounters, a moxie roll is used. Moxie uses your intelligence or charisma, whichever is higher. I really like this addition, as it creates opportunities for lots of different characters to get the spotlight. The initiative change to allow wisdom just makes sense, since dex could represent how fast your PC responds, while wisdom represents how quickly your PC recognizes something they need to react to. Honestly, I might even use that for my next 5e game if I run one again. Leveling is where things really get shaken up. You only really progress in your class from level 1 to level 5, with every 5 mission points earned resulting in a level up. The GM awards between 3 and 5 mission points after a successful mission is completed. These first 5 levels represent advancement through the military training provided by Stargate Command, and after level 5, PCs become a specialist. As they continue to earn mission points, those points can be spent directly on purchasing feats. Each feat has an MP cost, and once a PC has spent 10 MP, they advance to the next level, rolling for hit points, potentially increasing their proficiency bonus. Feats can cost as much as 9 MPs, so players can save up MP after multiple successful missions to get those big feats they're looking to buy. Some feats come free as you level up, mainly those increasing weapon damage. On the whole, I think this is a really interesting change and would make running long-term SG-1 campaigns pretty interesting. It's definitely trying to be a best of both worlds system, with a predefined level progression for each class to start off, and a very open system allowing for a lot of character customization. Bonus feats at 5, 11, and 17 to increase your weapon damage do feel a little, whoops, what do we do here? But the advancement system they're using is fine. All of this kind of depends on what the class themselves look like, so let's jump ahead to those, and then we'll circle back to race and backgrounds. There are 6 base classes in the Stargate SG-1 RPG: the Diplomat, the Engineer, the Medic, the Scientist, the Scout, and the Soldier. On the surface, this seems to cover all the options you'd think to want or need in an SG-1 game. Because you could feasibly run an entire long-term campaign in this game without ever firing a bullet, at least where content creation is concerned, we can't only be thinking about a class's combat ability like we normally would in a D&D or Pathfinder game. If I were to run this game, I would have combat for sure, but it's not a requirement to play, so we have to look at all the classes holistically. You could compare the Diplomat to Bards from 5th edition, but their inspirations are way more powerful. They could provide temporary hit points and armor class bonuses, so you can think of them as a preventative healer in your party. Engineers, if I was going to draw a comparison, maybe similar to an artificer, both in Pathfinder and D&D, where their main role is to heal machines or to create special modifications for both their and their allies' equipment, making the equipment better in specific situations. They can even learn a well-timed thump that provides temporary hit points to machines. Medics do exactly what you think they do. They heal damage made to their organic allies. Game uses the term scuffed and bloodied to generalize how hurt an ally might be, and medics' abilities do different things depend on how hurt the target is. The Scientist is obviously modeled after many a nerd's first TV crush, famed Stargate SG-1 member Samantha Carter. Scientists gain a resource called Eureka whenever they fail intelligence or wisdom checks, which they can then spend to give themselves advantage on future checks. Really cool mechanic, I think, representing learning from your mistakes and improving. Scout plays a pretty strong combat role focused on stealth, perception, and close range conflict. Think of them as a combination ranger and rogue. They are both able to stealthily get into places, lay booby traps, but they're also really meant for melee over ranged damage, which is a big deal in this game, since with all the weaponry, you do a lot of the fighting at range. And the Soldier, really straightforward. They focus on ranged combat, high constitution for staying in combat longer, and you can think of them maybe as a battle master fighter, where they have abilities called battle tactics that give themselves and allies bonuses in different kinds of combat situations. My favorite bit from the Soldier is a feat called Coordinated Response, where your allies can choose to take your initiative roll instead of rolling for their own, making sure that you all act at the same time in the combat round. Really cool. So, how happy am I with character options? Actually, really satisfied. There's a ton of feats available to specialists to take after hitting level 5, including the ability to take another class's feat. So your Scout could gain some medic procedure feats to be able to heal on the fly, or your Soldier could choose to avoid some of the issues SG-1 ran into when O'Neill ran his mouth and take a diplomacy feat. I won't go into every detail about the races, but they're totally fine. There's a new race created for the game called the Alteran, which are basically just humanity 10,000 years in the future. They've adopted a more peaceful lifestyle after almost destroying their planet and themselves in an attempt to suck all the resources out of their world. Besides the Alteran, humans, the Jaffa, the Tok'ra, and the Unas are all represented with their own proficiencies, minor abilities, and a specific sub-race that you can opt into, like opting to play a free Jaffa with no symbiote. The next cool bit of character creation changes in this game is how they've adjusted backgrounds to be a bigger deal, called origins. Every PC chooses 2 origins from 3 categories: biome, background, or racial, and you can't pick 2 origins from the same category. The background category is very similar to the standard 5e background, but the addition of the biome and racial categories and the ability to take 2 and gain both of their benefits is a great way to quickly create a backstory from your PC and have that backstory actually represented on your character sheet. As an example, you could play an aviator from the Tauri military, or a former enslaved student of Bratak. Taking it all in, between choosing your race, origin, and class, you can create a pretty unique character while still providing a ton of rails to keep characters on theme and appropriate for the specific game setting. Add in the specialist mechanic for all PCs after level 5, and by the end of several seasons of play, you're almost sure to have a PC that looks different than any you would run into at another table. Let's go over some other highlights that I think are worth mentioning. Each mission has a prep rating that defines how well equipped your PCs are for a mission, from a 0 prep mission where your team is caught totally off guard and doesn't have the use of any additional equipment, to a 4 prep mission where a team has been assigned to a forward base designated for long-term occupation. This is a really cool mechanic that I think adequately emulates playing characters in a large military organization with lots of equipment on hand. Speaking of equipment, gotta talk guns. There's a lot of weapons available here, with everything from combat knives and primitive bows to an H&K SR-9TC sniper rifle, and a chain gun. Equipment can be modified to increase their tech level, like adding a sight to a weapon or an extended capacity magazine. Your sidearm does a very respectable 1d8 piercing damage, rifles do 2d6, the chain gun can do 6d6. I'm trusting Wyvern's balancing here, but at the same time, it's not really supposed to be balanced, right? We're talking about putting military-grade weaponry potentially on the same field as more traditional D&D style weaponry. Though, if your PCs are using a P90 against enemies with bows and knives, something has gone terribly wrong. There's stat blocks for everything from concealed holsters, claymore mines, to Nakwita generators and the Jaffa Zatnikitel, which invoke exhaustion levels instead of actual damage. There's stats for using facilities like the gym to work out or eating at the mess hall, vehicles like the classic SG Malp, and all the way to a F-302 fighter interceptor are in the book. Yep, really. But remember, this game isn't trying to accurately simulate modern military hardware. It's trying to emulate a TV show that has modern military hardware in it. Those are two different things, so don't get too twisted in a specific weapon stat block. So, what do I think? Did Wyvern pull off what I thought would be impossible and create a game that uses the 5th edition rules to emulate a genre other than high fantasy? In short, yes, I think they did. As I said earlier, in my opinion, games live and die by their character creation process. If a player doesn't feel like they have enough options, or if they don't feel like the character in their head is accurately represented in the mechanics on their character sheet, they won't be excited to sit down and play it. That's why I've been enjoying Pathfinder 2e for the past year over D&D. But I think, for the incredibly specific setting of SG-1, Wyvern has created a game that accurately represents what I would want a Stargate RPG to play like. I won't really know until I have the opportunity to run a campaign using the system, but on paper, this seems like a great adaptation of one of my favorite media universes of all time. Your next question would be, I guess, should you buy this game and play it? If you're a Stargate fan or are interested in military sci-fi in general and are more comfortable playing 5e D20 over learning another system, then yeah, I think you would really enjoy this game. If you're a 5e content creator and are interested in seeing some new subsystems and character creation options, pick this book up. If you've ever thought about attempting to run a modern 5e game, but the idea of stat blocking modern weapons and equipment seems really daunting, this might be worth the money to open and at least take a look at for inspiration. But if you or anyone else at your table has never interacted with Stargate before and saw this was based on 5e so you thought you'd check it out, maybe don't buy this immediately. What you should be doing is logging into Amazon Prime Video and firing up the first season of Stargate SG-1 and giving it a shot. It's a really fun sci-fi show that holds up for the most part. The show has a ton of heart, and even though it's even more military than something like Star Trek, it deals with the morals of what they're doing in interesting ways and asks big questions that I think are still relevant. I think players coming from D&D 5e won't need a lot of adjusting. The biggest change I think I would prepare my players for is the deprioritization of combat encounters. If your table is used to 2 or 3 combat encounters a session, GMs will need to work with them to adjust expectations so that they understand that there will be what the game calls plot encounters in addition to action encounters. This gives the non-combat focused characters a real chance to shine. There are guides and rules for lots of different kinds of encounters, from infiltration, convincing, and research and development, so make sure everybody knows when their PC will be really useful and when others will have the chance to step into the spotlight. While this isn't in the core rulebook, I do want to note that Wyvern has been publishing the first season of their living campaign on the game's website stargatetherpg.com. So if you're interested in running the game but would like to rely on some published adventures, you have that option available to you. So that's my Stargate SG-1 RPG review. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. If this game seemed interesting to you and you'd be interested in getting more content about it, leave a comment down below. Maybe in 2022, I'll finally produce an actual play and I can take a second stab at a Stargate game. If you liked this more scripted, edited video over my more stream of consciousness read-throughs, let me know in the comments too so I can hear my community's preference. That's it for me. Don't forget to love each other. See you next time.